So this morning, we have David Goldberg, who's a go-to speaking coach and presenter with over 36 years of extensive experience voice directing both live and recorded voice. He quickly pinpoints word choice patterns, rephrasing, and specific speaking adjustments that better connect with you, the customers, colleagues, and drive your business forward. Whether you're on camera, on stage, behind the mic, in the boardroom, even in the office. David's coached over 10,000 CEOs, politicians, authors, podcasters, athletes, voice actors, everything from audiobook recordings, presentations, investor pitches, TED Talks, etc. So he's with us this morning to share with us his opinions on how we all could do better showing up for our virtual conversations. So welcome this morning, David.
Good morning.
So I understand, since I've heard your story before, and for those who are listening in, David is also a Vistage speaker, which is how I met him. You have studios up in New York. Could you just give us a little background of yourself and how you even got into this business?
Yeah, sure. I was a musician. I still am a musician, even though I rarely play these days. And in college, I went from playing in bands to recording bands, all because I found a very small recording device. I had never seen it before. I thought it was so cool, and I found that I had a passion, even more of a passion for recording bands than performing on stage. After college, next thing I know, I was recording larger bands, and soon after that, even larger bands. And next thing I know, I had songs on the radio, and the music scene was amazing. I got to play drums and keyboards with some super famous musicians, stuff you hear on the radio, which is always exciting. But the drug scene was crazy. I know Clyde has heard the story. The drugs were really insane with the bands who I worked with, and I am clean. I don't even drink beer. And anyway, driving home from a studio one night after a very long recording session, I think I was stoned from secondhand smoke. I needed to pull to the side of the highway, and I realized I'm going to kill myself, which is funny, Clyde, because usually it's the musicians who say we need to go clean before we kill ourselves. I didn't do the drugs. I still needed to stop because I was going to kill myself. So, what does one do with microphones and acoustic rooms, right? If you're not going to record music, well, voiceover. So I moved into the voiceover world, and my company grew, and I've had this company now running since 1989, which is amazing. And we have 5 studios in Times Square in New York City. It's one complex, one facility with 5 different studios. Yeah, and we record, as Clyde mentioned, audiobooks. We record the soundtrack for documentaries, commercials on TV, training videos, audio guides for museum exhibits, and really anytime you hear a voice, lots of video games and narrated apps and stuff. Anytime you hear a voice and you don't see that person speaking, that's where we are involved. We record the soundtracks for products. And about a year ago, well, my company is doing fine. And I'm able to kind of step back from it and sort of like a reinventing myself. I joined Vistage and I loved it. So I began speaking at Vistage. I love that. And I've really made a focus now, spending my time helping CEOs and other executives just learn how to come across well. And that leads us so nicely into the point of this call. I can say 2 things which are interesting. One is I've met a lot of very smart people in Vistage who don't come across smart. And that's a shame. It's really a shame. And they don't come across that smart because the way they look and the way they sound and the way they speak on Zoom. And it's sort of silly, I must say, because it is so easy to look better on Zoom. And it is so easy to sound better. And through some speaking coaching, it's so much easier to speak well. And so I've been focusing on this for about a year now and absolutely love it.
Well, that's what I'm hoping you'll share with us this morning, David, because since the pandemic, maybe even before, depending upon your situation, many of us work on Zoom a good portion of the day. And if we're not showing our best face, if we're not bringing our best persona, lighting, the whole thing to the table, then we're leaving a great deal. And that's, if you'll just share some tips with us on that, I would really appreciate it. I know when I first heard you speak about this, I thought to myself, wow, this is important. And that's what I'm hoping you'll share with us this morning. So let's just start with, I don't know, whether it's lighting, whether it's microphones, whether it's backgrounds. I mean, just give us the whole thing you can give us, just little tips and techniques that can really move us forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see this very much like a professional headshot. CEOs will spend so much money hiring a photographer to make sure that they have a good presence in that picture. That picture goes on their website, that picture goes in manuals, and it goes in on their LinkedIn profile, and yet they get on screen and yeah, they don't look so sharp. And it does that lack of attention to detail really comes through. And what's scary, and anyone listening should know this, what's super scary is that when someone listens or watches you before you open your mouth to say your first word, within a fraction of a second of seeing and hearing the sound quality, they make up their mind whether or not they like you, whether or not they can trust you, whether or not they want to do business with you. Before you open your mouth, before you give content, they have made up their mind. So that first impression, like a professional headshot, has to look sharp. You have to look the part. So yeah, we can talk about lighting first, I guess. Lighting is great. I wish Clyde didn't look so good on screen because then I could point out some changes to make, but he looks really good on screen. Clyde, you are really one of the few who do. It's shocking to me. Okay. Some quick tips about the way you come across on screen. So let's start with your positioning. Your head should go to the top of the screen, like Clyde's and my heads are. So many people get on Zoom, and I see this, and sometimes I see that. I know maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you want to fill up the screen of you and not airspace. You want to be centered. Make sure that there's nothing distracting behind you. It is shocking to me how many CEOs I work with who have a huge picture window in the back of their space, and without meaning to, my eyes start watching the cars go back and forth. When something moves, it just grabs your attention. I don't see a reason to have something behind you that will distract your listener. You don't want anything that will take your listener away from you. So keep the spotlight on you. So nothing distracting in the background. There should be nothing cut that your head breaks the space of in the background. In other words, don't have the corner of a piece of furniture half over your head. Just make sure the background looks good and preferably have as much space behind you as you can. Because the more space there is, the better you look. The opposite would be when someone takes even a headshot of themselves and they are standing right up against the door in the background. It just doesn't look good. Professional photographers would never do that. You should not do that at home. Have as much space as you can in the background. Blurred images, not so good. Just like faux backgrounds, not so good. Study after study shows that when someone has a blurred background or a faux background, like the Golden Gate Bridge, which is so common, or a tropical beach, the Zoom, whoever you're Zooming with, questions, are they hiding something? What's going on in the background? Inevitably, I realize that sometimes you have no choice, but there's something messy or whatever in the background. So maybe you have to do something. But it is not optimal at all to have anything in the background that is blurred out or faux. Just have something in the background that represents you. Phil, Clyde, sorry, oh my goodness. I think your books look great in the background. I just go for dead space, like just the black, right? The dark. But even then, it's in my background, I have two spotlights on the black walls behind me, just so there's some texture. So it's not just like oddly black. Think a lot about your space. Let's
Okay.
talk in terms of lighting. You should have two lights, preferably. Two lights are great. One a bit to your left, one a bit to your right. Both lights, let me get my hands on screen here. Both lights should be a little bit above your head and angled down. If a light is below you and facing up, you look really weird. And if a light is directly above your head, as you might have in your office, and it's coming right down on you, you look you get big shadows under your eyes and big shadows under your chin. You look like a ghost. So again, the lights out left and right, angled down, angled at you. Ring lights are great. Ring lights are big round lights. They're LED. They don't generate heat. They cost about $50 or $60. They're inexpensive. Get a ring light that allows you to change the color density. So depending on your background, your webcam, your skin tone, the clothes you like to wear, you can tune the kind of light that you have, and also make sure your ring light has an intensity function. So you can make the light brighter or duller. Really helpful. If you can only do one light, have one light almost dead in front of you, just a little bit off to the side. Again, angle down makes a big difference. In terms of the camera height, I would put the camera or your webcam about equal with your eyebrows. Generally, the camera lens should be just over your eyes, so around eyebrow level is great. A lot of people work with laptops, and that's great and that's convenient. But the laptop, you're sitting on a couch and you have the laptop on your lap, thus it's called a laptop. But now the camera is looking up at you. It's like looking up my nose. Like, that's not a pretty picture. Sorry for those of you who had to look at that, right? And don't have the camera above you because then you kind of look down like that. It looks weird. Be straight with the camera. Take all of this into consideration. When you get on screen with a customer, with a potential customer, especially a potential partner, any situation that you are or charging a customer, right? You need to look good. Okay. Now we can talk about sound. Well, Clyde, do you have any questions before I talk about sound?
No, I really appreciate everything you said, David, particularly about the placement on the screen, the lights, the whole thing. I'm just thinking to myself, wow, like you, I see some people who simply don't appreciate the subtleties of how they are appearing. And I think of it, it's sort of like when you're watching a local commercial on television versus one that is professionally produced. You can sort of tell, like, okay, they didn't put a lot of money into this one. That would be the local guy's family selling you a car or some damn
Yeah,
thing you might see on TV. And as much as they try, it just doesn't look the same. Uh, versus watching the commercials from the Super Bowl, for instance, most recently, where some of these things are so polished it almost looks too good. But there's a huge difference, and my sense is that's how we come across unintentionally. We look like that local guy who really doesn't understand what's going on here, and that's not the position I think most of us want to be in.
exactly. Yeah. When you watch a low, I would call it a low budget ad on TV versus a large budget ad. And yeah, there are five indicators that a viewer recognizes that makes that ad appear low budget. And we notice this within a heartbeat. Really, before content, before the product is shown, before the logo is shown, we recognize from the outset of that commercial. It's from the way the sound quality, the lighting, body language, the visual appearance, just all of these elements are critical. And then once the speaker speaks, yes, that gives it away too, and which we'll talk about because that's the most important thing of everything we'll talk about today. But first, sound quality we should talk about because that's huge. So many people who talk into Zoom never think about how their voice sounds to the next person. And that's a shame because in most cases, 98% of the time, when someone talks into Zoom, they sound much worse to the recipient, to the listener. And that happens for a bunch of reasons. It happens due to poor microphone placement, poor microphone selection, poor acoustics in your office area or wherever you are Zooming from. And it also happens because people who talk on Zoom forget that Zoom has some algorithms that affects the quality of your sound. So I would strongly encourage you, super strongly encourage you to do a test. You should record yourself or go get onto a Zoom meeting like Clyde and I are right now. Clyde could record a couple of seconds of this and then watch it back at some other time on headphones, on good headphones. And 98% of you will realize, oh, wow, I don't sound as good as I thought I sound. So let's talk about quickly how to make your sound better. Number one, in terms of microphones, get a directional microphone, a microphone that is picking up your voice, what's ahead of it, and theoretically rejecting sound from the left, the right, on top, on bottom, and behind. Because if I'm talking here in relationship to my microphone, any noise anywhere else, I don't need recorded. I don't need captured. That could be the radiator that's over that way. It could be the garage that's that way. It could be the kids upstairs that's that way. We don't need that stuff. Get a directional microphone. It really does help the quality of your voice pick up. It helps your voice be picked up much stronger. Next thing, have the microphone near you. That makes a big difference. I get on calls, and I'm sure many of you have, where someone sounds like they're so far away, and I can demonstrate that. It kind of sounds like this. Now, that doesn't sound very good, right? And when you're talking with someone, that person that you're talking to sounds so bad that they're at a deficit. I use this word from the outset of your conversation. That person who sounds distant is putting themselves at a deficit. They're weakening their professional image because they don't sound good, is not showing attention to detail. So have that microphone be near you. Sometimes that might be hard if you're using a laptop microphone and you want your laptop to be out there, 4 feet away from you, or you have it positioned on a table. That's difficult. So get a different microphone, like I have here. This is $100 microphone. It's a USB microphone, plug and play. It couldn't be simpler, and it sounds great. It sounds great because it's plug and play and it's easy to use. It sounds great because it's near me. It also sounds great because I have treated the acoustics in my office. And that is a huge thing for everyone to do. Treat the acoustics in your office. I want to talk about that, but I first need to talk about the result of acoustics. So I'm going to talk sort of shift what I'm saying, and then we'll come back to the acoustics of your office. Zoom has a number of algorithms, as I mentioned earlier. One in particular takes the volume that you speak at, and it compresses it. It takes all of your volume from when you whisper and you speak softly. If you yell, it takes that range of volume and it takes the louder volumes and it brings them down. So the volume is more consistent to the listener. It's called a voice. Sorry, volume compression, as opposed to data compression. It's volume compression. So again, you have a low volume and you have a loud volume. Zoom kind of brings that volume down. It compresses the volume. Now, so far that sounds fine. But then what Zoom does is it takes the overall level, which is now consistent, which is more pleasing to hear, and it raises the whole thing. And in doing that, it's raising all the stuff that's low volume, like echo in your room, mouth clicks, breath, the dog next door, the siren down the street, all of that stuff gets amplified. That's why I'm sure you've been on calls before, whether it's speakerphone or Zoom or whatever situation. You say to the person who you're speaking with, boy, it sounds like you're in an echo chamber. And they say, no, it sounds fine where I am. Well, of course it sounds fine to them because they are in their office, but you are hearing their voice after Zoom has done that algorithm thing and kind of squashed the sound and compressed the sound. So test your volume. So the more echo you can eliminate from your own office area or wherever you Zoom, the better. So what I do in my office is I have black pads, sound pads on the left and right of me. I have them in front of me, and I have them on the ceiling, and I have carpeting on the floor. All of those sound pads and carpeting, they soak up the sound waves. So when I speak, my voice doesn't echo, echo, echo around the room. It doesn't bounce around. Remember, even a little bit of echo in your recording area will be amplified to the recipient. So if you hear any echo at all in your speaking area, you will sound worse to your listener. So you really need to treat the acoustics. You can also treat the acoustics by putting big couches in your office and chairs. Some people will, if you have an important Zoom or something like that, you can get a shower. It's weird, but you can hang a shower curtain on your ceiling. I know you're thinking that's really weird, but what you do is you hang a moving blanket from it. And so only when you have an important Zoom call, or anytime you have a Zoom call, hang the moving blanket. You can move it like a curtain, slide it back and forth, or just clip it or unclip it. It makes a drastic difference in sound quality. Very often I get on calls and people say, oh, you sound so clear. Your voice sounds so good. And they say, what microphone is it? It's not so much the microphone, it's more so the acoustics. So if you want to look and sound good, you need to do these things.
Wow.
Okay. I want to say one last thing about looking good, and then we can talk about speaking if you want.
Sure.
Okay. I talked about testing your voice, having a recording and listening back to it. Believe it or not, you should test your clothing. And now you're thinking, what? So when you get ring lights, they're pretty bright. So I have had sessions with super smart people who don't look that good because you can see right through their shirt. Recently, I was working with a gentleman, an investor of a pretty substantial, quite a substantial startup, and it looks amazing, the startup. But boy, when I was brought in to give him some critique on his pitch, on the investor pitch, and it was hard to focus because he was sweating through his shirt. The ring lights sort of amplified how much or not amplified. It made the shirt like translucent. I can't think of the right word. Like you could see the ring lights like went right through his shirt, and you could see down to the undershirt, and then you saw him sweating. It could not have been a worse look. He's making this great pitch, and he looks just terrible. So practice, test your clothes. Dark colors seem to work much better. Get away from stripes, get away from plaid, get away from things which could be distracting. Now, if you're just talking with your family on Zoom or your friends, that's fine. Who cares? But when you are dealing with an investor pitch, a product pitch, a potential customer, that's time to clean things up a little bit. So test all of these things.
It occurs to me that while I appreciate everything I just heard, sometimes we should maybe put our head into the game and realize we should look good even for our friends and family. Because if we only wait until we think it's important, then what does that say to the people we're not respecting enough to show up as good as we can show up? So my sense is, as opposed to, well, you can do this when you're just casual, we all might want to be, if we're on camera, it's no longer casual. We should look as good as we could look. Just my sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. Which for me means no more zooming in my pajamas if I'm like, no, I'm kidding. Okay. How many of you, and great thing, right? You can zoom in your pajama pants. How many of you out there have zoomed in pajama pants, but you have a nice shirt on top? Maybe you're wondering, maybe I'm doing that right now. Maybe I have slippers on. You don't know, but that's the nice thing about Zoom. I've had kind of 1.5 sessions, but one session which was quite interesting because I was working with a very famous doctor, the head of a nonprofit, and he needed to record a video for this nonprofit. So he had such a loud chirp, and this actually brings up a good point. He had such a loud chirp because it was starched that he couldn't wear it during the recording session. So let me make a noise here. If you can hear this noise, does that come through Zoom?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Sometimes the algorithms can get rid of where they try to get rid of noise. Well, if you can hear this noise, imagine just like a nylon running suit or a very starched shirt. His shirt was so heavily starched that as he was at the microphone, it kept making loud noises. So he needed to record with the shirt off. So again, test. You never know what comes up. All different things do. Test and be aware, everyone. So as you look back at your test and you listen to how you sound, how you look, your positioning on camera, the lighting, the background, be aware. Look at all of these different points that we've spoken about. Okay, so the last thing I would think that is super important, perhaps the most important thing, is how you speak. And most speakers, again, 98% of speakers who I work with have a lot of room for improvement. There is so much to talk about, and so much of what I have to talk about would be tailored to the person. I can only give you some sort of generalized some concepts, some things to think about. When you begin your speech, your pitch, your keynote, your TED Talks, your media interview, a company podcast, whatever you are speaking on, about, and for, wherever you are, make sure you begin with something exciting. No matter what, start with something exciting. It is so easy to get in front of a microphone and say at the outset of your speech to say, "Oh, test, test, test. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me?" That's not an exciting beginning. And almost everyone does that. Almost everyone's first word is, that's not exciting. Clyde, when you said, "Good morning, David," if I said, it's a turnoff. And as I said earlier, people make such quick impressions of you. Make sure your first word, your first impression is exciting. Good morning. Great to see you. Even if you're having the worst day, it's great to see you. Come up with something that's exciting. Make sure you stay enthusiastic during your recording. Okay, super important. Next thing, do watch out for filler words. Filler words are all over the place. Filler words are words that we as a population feel inclined to put in between sentences when we're trying to think of the next word. For example, kind of like those are all filler words. A great thing you can do in place of filler words is to leave space. Space is fabulous. This is an expression I often use, and I always feel awkward saying it, but it's so true. Space should be your friend. Pauses should be your friend. Give people time to absorb what you say. Give them a moment to digest what you say. And even more importantly, if you have a deck behind you or you're sharing something, give them a moment to look at it. The worst thing you could do is feel like make your recipient or your audience feel like you're rushing them through the content. Don't rush anyone through anything unless you have a time limit. And then if you have a time limit, for example, a 3-minute timed pitch or something, then have less content. Don't rush anyone through your content. Take space, take pause. Don't feel the necessity to fill up every little space with a filler word. Space is fine. Next thing I would say is when asked questions, which is very often the case in interviews, try not to begin every sentence with so. And you might think, well, that's kind of weird. Like, why would I begin with the word so? Well, you probably do. If you were on screen right now, whoever is watching this, and I said, tell me about yourself, you'd say, so I've been a Vistage member. So I've been doing, so my company does this, and that's not great. You'll find, and you'll probably laugh now, as you watch other people being interviewed, you'll hear every sentence starts with so. Next thing I would strongly encourage you to do is to write a well-crafted elevator pitch and rehearse it. You know, everyone who's watching this, you can anticipate the questions that you will be asked in almost every situation. A new customer, a new partner, an old customer, whatever it is, a service provider. Someone's going to say to you, oh, so tell me about your business. So how did you get into this business? Where is the business going? Are you looking for funding? What do you think of the market? How is the new tariffs doing? There are questions you can anticipate that you will be asked. And the only reason you are asked these questions and the only reason you take the time to answer these questions is because they are important to your career, to your business, to your life. So if it's important to you, then take a time tonight, take an hour tonight and write out well-crafted responses and then rehearse them. So when someone asks you these questions, you're ready to go. It shocks me to this day how many people I ask, how many CEOs of large companies I say, tell me about this business, or investors, tell me about the startup. And they say, well, I saw this, and that's not a way to answer a question. So take pride in what you say. Be enthusiastic about it. Okay.
Just the tips you've offered up this morning, David, could make us all move so much further along in the impression scale. And as you've pointed out repeatedly, just in our conversation this morning, it's that immediate impression that we all get when, in fact, we're showing up sometimes before we open our mouth, when we open our mouths. That's what we're talking about correcting. And just using some of the tips you've shared with us today, I believe could move us all huge steps forward. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for your energy, for your insight, and for your willingness to share with us this morning. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, I love this stuff. If anyone is interested, I can help you. The custom tailored speaking is really where I excel, making sure you just come across really well. So yeah, anyone can get in touch.